One of my guides during my project times had given me one of these suggestions that opportunities knock once, twice, thrice. You need to capture every opportunity that you get across. Yes, that was my journey that I started as a records management analyst. But to be very specific, it was not a one go chance. It was basically the thing that I opted for. As we all know, like in terms of we are 1.50 crores, that's almost 1.5 billion people across the globe. So I would say that's just in India, and remaining the people are outside in US and other countries. So it's a strategic powerhouse, I would say.
In your opinion, what's one misconception people in the US have about clinical research in India?
Lower cost means the lower quality. Everyone is learning. Everyone, including me, is still learning. We are still at such a level that if we don't learn, we would be outdated for sure.
Welcome back to another episode of the TMF Daily Podcast, where we go behind the scenes of clinical research with the people shaping how the world studies medicine. And joining me today is someone who embodies that global perspective. My guest, Sankat Shah, has worn so many hats, from records management specialist, senior team lead e-clinical system, and now he's the center manager at Shine TCS. He's a powerhouse of experience in GCP, clinical operations, leadership, and bioinformatics. He's a professional who's worked with some of the world's top pharmaceutical companies while training and leading cross-functional teams to excellence. So whether you're a CRA, an eTMF specialist, or just someone who wants to learn that why behind the scenes, this conversation is going to expand your global lens. Sankat, welcome to the TMF Daily Podcast.
Thank you so much, Nicole, for inviting me over. It is a really great pleasure to connect with you. Thank you again for inviting. And yes, whatever I'm going to share today is going to be my own personal thoughts. It is not going to be impacting any of the institutions or organizations that have been connected in my past, or I'm going to connect in the future aspect. But yes, this is an overall journey that I have lived. And thank you for the kind introduction. I really appreciate that part and that fact that I have been able to connect across all over the globe. And yes, that was my journey that I started as a records management analyst. But to be very specific, it was not a one go chance. It was basically the thing that I opted for. One of my guides during my project times had given me one of these suggestions that opportunities knock once, twice, thrice. You need to capture every opportunity that you get across. So just going on that note, I would say that the journey has been really interesting, starting with the administrative parts where records management was one of the initial phases, and then building it up all across to creating leads, functionality, e-clinical functionality, and having a lot of team members across me in terms of global as well as local part. So the transition was really fascinating, I would say, because working on an administrative task and then jumping to the archival perspectives to getting into e-clinical aspects and right now heading a center has been really fascinating. So thank you again for this really nice introduction, and thank you so much for having me over here.
So Sankat, what originally sort of drew you into clinical research?
As I said in my previous part, that I was actually willing to identify and work with patients. However, working in clinical research was a dream for me because it was one of the applications of bioinformatics in terms of drug development and clinical research. So at the highly structured level, when I see myself in my college days, I was always like, okay, I need to get something where I'm always working with patients. And that was my first and foremost thought about going into clinical research. And this was really a dream come true for me, that I have started my journey from eTMF, and it has actually been on the a course that I've been able to work across. So with global teams, with local teams, always improving human health is what my concept was, and that's where I came into clinical research.
Now, many people sort of see clinical research as this complex global ecosystem. And from your perspective, like what makes India such a key player in that ecosystem today?
As we all know, like in terms of we are 1.50 crores, that's almost 1.5 billion people across the globe. So I would say that's just in India, and remaining the people are outside in US, in other countries. So it's a strategic powerhouse, I would say, for sure. Obviously, the cost wise, it is always going to be cheap, but it is not the case that, okay, because it's cheap, it is always going to be on a lower side. So that's not the case. But yes, diverse, large patient pool. That means we have like genetically varied diseases across the globe. We also have statistically robust ideologies that is going to be there. That's where I feel that we have one of the greatest pool of patients. Next is medical and scientific talent. So if when we talk about medicine, we have a lot of physicians who are English speaking physicians who are actually into research, who are into their prime, their, I would say that's where they are actually able to understand the GCPs, they are able to understand the clinical research, they are able to understand all those global perspectives. That is one of the other things. And I would still have two more pointers that I would like to share in over here, and those are would be operational scale and agility. Now, how can we talk about operational scale? Because it's a huge country with huge population, a lot of CROs coming into picture, a lot of SMOs coming into picture, that is site management organizations. And that's where we actually have to have a greater execution of larger than life scale, I would say, perspectives of the clinical research. The last one, but the most important point that I would cover over here would be about the regulatory maturity. It has been a lot of scale that it has came from very huge challenges, because across India, regulatory authorities have to have a lot of changes, a lot of standardizations, because we have multiple variety of people as well as environment. So over there, that maturity to come in, and that has came after 2019, almost I would say during the COVID tenure, when people started to understand that a lot of things had to be virtually managed. At that time, the new drugs and clinical trials rule 2019 came into the picture, and that's where this regulatory has gone from a under mature perspective to a hugely mature perspective. And that's why I would say this is a huge gain for overall world in this terms.
Now, you've worked with global pharma companies and multinational teams. Like, how did those early experiences shape your understanding of like how clinical research trials really operate across those borders?
So yes, that's a really important question, Nicole, I would say in today's terms, because we all are working across the floor, I would say, like in terms of multiple time zones and everything. But to be very specific, I would start with GCP. GCP is a floor, it's not a ceiling. It has been into kind of universe where we would have all those applications connected to it. And in this aspect, I would definitely say that obviously local expertise is always going to be required, because one size fits all does not go with GCP. But the implementation has to be in terms of their standard aspects. That is the reason it is called as floor. And I would always keep on backing up that it's a floor, not a ceiling. It's a floor, not a ceiling. And then next part would be about centralization. So obviously, when we manage the global trials, we always have to be having a lot of aspects in terms of eTMF, CTMS, EDC, because that's where we would be connected. Otherwise, if I say that India or US, we would have different time zones, different working methodologies. But the power of centralization is always going to be the most and utmost important thing in this aspects, wherein we working at Mumbai location, or we working at Madrid location, or we working at Massachusetts location would always be the same. So that's another part. And I was already talking about the cross cultural part and different time zones. So obviously, the time zones are always going to differ across the world because we are going to work in a multi-facet world. That's what I feel, wherein we need to learn all the extremes, all the minor parts. Like, as for example, if I say the skills that US people have, they would be so soft spoken, and there are certain peoples in particular locations in across, I would say, other countries, particularly, I do not want to name them, but in Southeast Asia there are countries where they are so much rude, they don't have those specifications. So those minute things are also going to impact your communication. So always stay empathic, always stay precise. That's what my go to has been. And that's where I feel that we all have to work on a people skill to approach the urgency. That's how I would communicate this part.
So, when you compare India to the US, like what are the biggest differences in your experience? How clinical research is conducted culturally, operationally, and maybe regulatory wise?
Sure. So I would go first with the cultural and patient mindset, because that's a huge, huge difference across both the countries. Because as we know, India is a huge country and US cannot be compared again in size. So both of them have that huge tendency to work across multiple tags. Patient wise, to be very specific, in India, we always have a collective approach. That means it is always going to be that, okay, the trust factor has always to be there in the terms of physician, and then only the patients would be coming back and sharing that this is where we want to join in as a clinical research subject or those things. Whereas in US, it's an individualistic approach. That means the person is already aware, he or she is going to get into the details about what is the individual centric aspects, what is the global aspects. Those things are going to be there. Next is operational infrastructure, which is again another way out, where in India we have research is concentrated in large hospitals and private sites. But if we talk about smaller versions, it's always going to be difficult in India, particularly to keep those people very much into the clinical research. However, in US, this is a standardized structure and vast network, both academic wise, both hospital wise, and I would even include the private clinics or smaller clinics are also into that much research aspect, that they are deeply integrated with technologies and research, and hence it is going to be little bit more easier in those terms. But yeah, again, regulatory framework wise, I have to definitely picture that point as well, because CDESCO is Central Drug Standard Control Organization is there in India, whereas FDA would be there. And FDA is pretty highly streamlined, transparent, and rigorous. I would also mention rigorous. That is where US gets so much of a benefits in those terms. Whereas in India, the process is becoming fast. it is going towards the similar part, but I would still say that it requires a lot of local regulatory aspects to be considered, because we have a lot of people with multiple ethics committee across, even across big hospitals as well. So that is one of the major things that I would definitely share it. And the last but not the least would be speed and cost. Often in India, we have faster patient recruitments due to high patient volume and significantly lower cost because we work in those terms. But in US, I would definitely say that it's a high operational cost, and to maintain those standards that they are already following is another point where we would have to consider. So the cost factor, I would always say that India would be more easily considered in those terms. But yes, fundamentally, if we see, US is always going to be on a higher note right now. Obviously, India is catching up, but yeah, it would take time.
So let's say I got a TMF job and I'm managing sites in India for the first time ever. And where am I going to study? Where are the regulations? What do I need to know?
As I was mentioning very clearly, that local regulations are always going to come into picture when we talk about this. So with FDA being so much flexible in terms of identifying all the aspects of where this drugs could be manufactured, could be researched, could be even provided later on after the complete clinical research goes and appropriately the drug comes into the market. Then over here, the ethics committee, that is where I would say that in India, ethics committees would be the ones who would be more involved in those type of structures, whereas in US it is going to be a FDA, that's the regulatory authority. In India, the regulatory authorities would still be available, but ethics committee and regulatory authorities together make them very much combined effort to put in across. And that's where the eTMF that you're talking about, that if you're working on an eTMF, the CROs, the regulatory authorities, the SMOs sometimes are involved in other activities of CROs, and third party companies are the ones that are always going to give you the right amount, right qualifications, and even right quality aspects where it is going to come in this aspect. That's how I would summarize this.
How would you describe like the patient recruitment experience in India compared to the US? You said it was a little bit easier, but how is it different?
Definitely. So I did say it's easier, but I would still go with all the three aspects: easier, harder, and different. Because different is always going to be making one of the major factors in terms of what things are happening here, how it is happening different across the US. So the easier factor, everyone knows we are a diverse pool of people with a lot of genetic aspects. So obviously it's going to be much easier in terms of that aspect, as well as cost effectiveness is going to be there. So these are the easier factors, but the harder and the different factors are the main ones that I would get into it, because those are really different in terms of keeping the clinical research alive, I would say. So the harder factor or the harder challenge is going to be the one where people are not engaged. In India, people get bored easily. So they may be like, okay, today I'm in part of a clinical research. Tomorrow I would be like, I don't want to be part of clinical research. I would go home. I got some money in terms of finance. I'm fine. I'm done. I cannot keep on waiting. That's one of the hardest aspects in India that I would make sure that people should be aware, because long term standardizations do not happen. And that's the reason people get bored easily and they are not part of clinical research. So, that is one of the major factors that I would say is going to be there. But overall, if we see in terms of different factors that impact, are always going to be relationship, the trust building. When a physician talks about a clinical research to his or her patient, the patients are on a trust factor. They have that emotions attached with the physician, and hence they actually get ready that okay, we are into this clinical research. So that's one of the major, I would say, relationship benefits that India would be having in terms of this part. Whereas in my perspective, in US, it is more transactional based, or it is give and take based. That is where the factor would come into this. So the trust is the different factor, the emotion is the different factor wherein it is going to come across. Ultimately, I won't say that it is completely India based or US based or Europe based, but I would still say that rapid patient enrollment is where India can achieve a lot more that they are already into, but maintaining the high retention rates and ensuring the appropriate quality is what I would be considering in terms of different factors for sure.
So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about technology. And it's changing globally. Like, how have you seen digital tools like the eTMF evolve in India's research space?
Yes, so eTMF has been one of the major criteria that I have loved personally. And I would definitely say that these tools are always going to be the ones that are going to change across the globe everything that has been happening in the clinical research. Now the digital mandate that has started happening across the world, I would say, because it's a global integration. It's not only for particular aspects. India was always a paper centric country, to be specific, but now they have started working across as a digital master, to be very specific. They have started implementing eTMF, they have started implementing EDC, they have started implementing CTMS. And these technologies, I would say, are the ones that are always going to matter a lot in today's working environment. And global CROs that have came here, not only global CROs, I would even say that global sponsor companies who are part of India, they have also been emphasizing a lot on these tools because that's where the mandate has came, and that's where we are going to go ahead. Now, to be very specific, I will tell about the current state of technologies that we as the Indians are using. So we are using them in terms of where we actually get advantage. We are still a paper centric country. We feel that okay, papers are going to give us a much more aspects of this, but real time oversight has become completely into every CROs. Obviously, the smaller CROs might still take little longer to get acquainted to all this, but major companies, major CROs, major IT, pharma IT companies, I would say, have started decentralized processes, and that's where the sponsors, the CROs, the teams across have gone into innovating everything with technology, implementing those in multifaceted aspects again in terms of only India, not only across the world, but even in India, because there could be multiple sites that are working. So they have started implementing all this so the trial documentation can be as standard as possible, and whenever it is required for a regulatory submissions, it would be easy. So adoption has started happening across India nowadays, I would say.
In your opinion, like, what's one misconception like people in the US have about clinical research in India?
To be very specific, lower cost means the lower quality. To be very specific, this is one of the biggest misconceptions, not only in terms of US, but I would say wherever this comes, like a lower cost or a larger population, that means they might not be the right perspective in the terms of quality and data. Now, I would say that, okay, this was possibly a case longer back, but with current perspective, this is not the right part. The cost savings is in India is basically because of the different economic structures, lower salaries, and overall operational costing. That's where we are able to cut down a lot of infrastructure parts, a lot of cost that is going to come across. In reality, sites in India are participating in global trials, and that's where all the GCP standards are being followed, all the datas are appropriately identified, regulatory compliances are going to be as standard as in US. But yes, it is still being manufactured to a larger scale. It is happening, but lower standards is what I would say is one of the misconceptions that is going to be there till the time we actually become as standardized as other countries, for sure.
As a leader, how do you foster quality and consistency in environments where processes or expectations might differ globally?
I always have said one thing, which is about my own learnings. So when I learned, I was making it standard procedures, that standardization, training, and technology. All three of them have to be together. And then only you would be able to make sure that you are actually into the same stream where others are going to go ahead across and give you their own notices, their own standardized procedures. But if as an individual, if as a leader, I would say these three things are always going to be on the top. Otherwise, you would never be able to go across and give your answers. So for standardization, I would say it's going to be non-negotiable. Standardization or standard operating procedures are your top go-to. If you do not follow them, you're out for sure. So that's always going to be one of the major aspects that I would always focus on, and I would, as a leader, always keep on telling every individual to be there. Next is the technology, the enforcement. I would not say it is enforcement, but it's enforcement, because every single person nowadays have to go through that technology. So when you are building in some technologies, when you are working with technologies, obviously you need to be very much standardized. Otherwise, if you deviate, technology would capture it, and that's where you again would fail. So make sure that you are on standardized process as well as you are in the same go with the technology. And the last one is the training, which is again one of the major perspectives that I would say that is always going to be in terms of this track. When we talk about training, I would say it's a cultural bridge across the globe. Because when we talk about the trainings, how it happens in US, in India, in Europe, in Australia, but the local aspects or the local perspectives in terms of training, how you train individuals at particular location and how you train the individuals at a global location makes a lot of difference. So the cultural bridge is going to be always working out, and that's where it's going to be the most interactive perspective in terms of this what I'm going to share it. So for sure. So these are the three things, and I would go ahead with those for sure.
So, how do you see the next 5 years of clinical research sort of evolving, even in India with AI and remote trials and global partnerships?
Okay, so as I was mentioning, nowadays we are more into decentralized trials that have started happening across the globe. So, with integration of I would say hyper efficiency and therapeutic specialization are the major factors that are going to always be in focus. With AI, data integration is going to be so easy, but it has, again, it would have to have your appropriate standardizations. Otherwise, if you do not standardize those processes, the result that you are going to get would be completely different from what we are expecting in terms of those. So AI data integrity will have to be going parallelly in those parts. Now, in terms of global perspective, or even if we consider India, it's going to be structured patient databases. That's the most important thing that has to be come across. And otherwise, as I said, if the patient database is not standardized, it is not structured, the result is always going to be different. The second point that I was talking about was decentralized trials. So the blend of urban and rural settings in India as well as in globe has become a ideal testing ground, and that's where the hybrid and remote trials are always going to be seen in terms of the increase part. Now a lot of examples can take it, like wearable instruments have came in where you are able to identify how many steps you have taken, what is your blood pressure. So all those wearable devices are giving a lot of information to you, whereas telemedicine contributions have also came across. These are few of the examples that I would say that we have started implementing not only in India but across the global perspective. And that's where the decentralized trials would be easily able to be competing in terms of the standard procedures that we have been talking about. And last but not the least, it's going to be a global partnership. 150, almost 150 billion people are not going to be a small, I mean, it's going to be a co-innovation partner. It's always going to be a co-innovation partner. It is only obviously a early stage, I would say, to talk about those co-innovations. But yes, India has been targeting, I would say, a lot of global partnerships across. To be very specific, in terms of South Asia, I would definitely say it has become a novel country, novel drug target where a lot of diseases, a lot of research has started happening. So, global partnerships and co development are going to be the next big go for sure.
For someone listening who's just starting in India or abroad, like what's one piece of advice you'd give to stand out in this global industry?
Very specifically, I would say that go ahead, explore it. Exploring clinical research is always going to give you a lot of insights. Obviously, everyone is learning. Everyone, including me, is still learning. We are still at such a level that if we don't learn, we would be outdated for sure. For sure, we would be outdated. So, anyone who is just joining this industry, I would very much straight away say learn, learn, and learn. And as far as you can learn, that's going to be your global impact. Obviously, it takes time. It takes time to become an individual. It takes time to become a person who would be thorough with clinical research. Even after 12 plus years of experience today, I would say that I'm still getting to learn a lot of things wherein things are so much impactful. So, very straight, my always go to would be learn. And as far as you can do, explore clinical research, explore eTMF, explore all the factors that are going to be connected with this part. Because if you don't explore, you may not be the one who actually you want to become. So that's my go to say. And another go to say would be opportunities are always coming. Just open the door, just try to knock over them and try to connect. That's how it is going to be always the case.
So at the end of the show, I always ask my guests these two questions. And the first one is, what's your favorite trial master file document and why?
Okay. So I would say eTMF is my favorite, but still, if I have to choose one, I am always going to go with the trial management plan, because if you get into the detail of trial management plan, It's always going to give you a lot of insights about how the things have occurred, how they are going to be going forward. And that's where the other things. Definitely, as I said, eTMF is always my favorite. My favorite, like your favorite as well. I know, Nicole, you are also into that. So I know that we are on that notes that we love eTMF. But yes, trial management plan is always the one that I would always look up to, because it gives all the insights about what things happen, how things are going to take place, and then where actually your expertise would be required. So this is always going to be there. So thank you for that. But it's a really good question, and as I said, eTMF is go to love.
So, the last question I have for you is, what's the best career advice you ever received and who's it by?
The best career advice that I've received, as I shared in my introduction, was opportunity knocks once, twice, thrice. You always have to go back. You need to open the doors. You need to connect. And if you connect, I would say that it is always not only in terms of learning or earning, but any opportunity that you find are going to be appropriate as per your satisfaction levels. Please go ahead, explore those, because opportunities would not keep on coming again and again and again. It would only be to certain period where you would keep on getting all those perspectives to explore everything. So I would definitely say opportunities knocks once, twice, thrice. Grab those, explore those, and this is where I am going to go with. But yes, overall, if I say I had got another advice, which was in terms of take and give it back. Because if you take everything and you don't give it back, you are always going to be on a two steps back than the people who are going to give it back. So this is another advice that I got from one of my very close friends, and we actually working in terms of one of the parts. So he was actually a client as well as a friend, and he shared this to me, and I felt that this is really one of the go-tos for sure. So these are the two things that I would share for everyone.
Sanket, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your insights today. It's been such a wonderful conversation, and I'm sure our listeners, they've gained a lot from your expertise. And I'm so grateful for you and to be able to call you a friend and that you took time out of your day for this. So thank you so much.